Why are they in love? I don't know. And the book doesn't know either. The book suffered, and so did I. Let's review Addie LaRue. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Eliza, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a book review, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is going to be spoiler free if or until I get to a point in the video later where I tell you there's going to be spoilers. So sit down, relax, get comfy, and let's chat. This book follows Addie, who is a young woman in 1700s rural France who is about to get married off to a man that she does not love, barely knows, barely likes. She is not happy with that and runs off into the forest in her wedding dress very cinematically to escape her fate. She desperately wants to avoid this path that her life is about to take and essentially makes a deal with the devil or one of the old gods in order to escape this fate and to be free. However, this deal she strikes comes with strings that curses her life from that moment forward because she is now eternally young as she's immortal. However, she will be forgotten by every person she meets as soon as she meets them. And that's a very lonely way to spend eternity, right? This book was my first impression of V.E. Schwab, who I would definitely read again after reading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. She's a very talented writer with beautiful prose. And this book is interesting because it straddles both historical fiction and contemporary because it jumps between the past timeline of when she makes that deal to the present, with some light fantasy magical realism elements in there too. I loved the beginning when we got the bits of Addie in 1700s France, and we also get a look at her family life with her mother and father and growing up in that time. So many gorgeous bits of writing that I highlighted in those first few chapters. But one of my issues with this book that I think a lot of people liked is that about a third of the way through this novel, the genre feels like it completely flips into contemporary fiction, which I understand for the point of the plot and introducing another character in the present, but it totally took me out of the story, and I don't think we needed to dwell there with this new character in addition to Addie for so long. The storytelling was really wonderful, so even though I personally think the plot was good, I did not like the genre switch. This book is quite long as well. I think it's around 500 pages, and in a lot of places not a lot is necessarily happening, but you're understanding Addie as a character with her repetitive experience of being forgotten by everyone she meets and comes across and has a connection with, because as soon as they look away or turn away from her, she will be forgotten until, of course, she's not. I really loved being alongside Addie in that early stage of the book in particular, when she was learning to understand exactly the parameters of her curse. If she could be remembered by anyone at all, if she could leave any kind of mark, if she could take things, or how she survived. I found the rest of it with the historical elements and time periods romantic, poetic, almost dreamy. And while I loved those parts of the book, I found the modern day chapters quite exhausting and repetitive. The contemporary chapters I feel like did not use or show off or showcase V. Schwab's writing talents as much, because some of it was very on the nose, almost 2010s Tumblr wannabe poetry, but there was a constant intrigue of wanting to know what would happen and how this story would progress. And the thing with this story is I really loved the historical setting, but even when she's in the present modern day and alludes in her, I think it was first person, to past events that she's been part of, like when she was a spy, or like when she went from one country to a whole nother continent across the seas in the bowels of a ship. We don't get to see any of that And I feel like we kind of got the least interesting parts of the possible story of her life as a whole. And yes, I know some people might have found it really repetitive, her meeting someone, then being forgotten, then being sad she's being forgotten, because that is a lot of the story. But also maybe that's kind of the point, because that is her life. It is repetitive and it is sad, and in some ways boring, and in other ways really not, because it's so unusual. She can never relax in a place because it's not like she's actually invisible. People see her, and there's kind of little ways and tricks to her curse that means she's not necessarily detected. And perhaps the book as a whole, because for a lot of it is quite plotless, mimics the fact that her life cannot have a plot because she cannot put real roots down anywhere or have lasting connections with anyone because no one remembers her. And the biggest thing, I think, for me was the fact that when I think back for this book now, because I read it a few months ago and I've still been thinking about it, when I think back, I loved the historical elements. I loved the kind of sad but whimsical romance, poetic aspects of the story, and the love, the stories within the story, and her love of books. The story is sad, but a lot of it is also kind of romanticized. She's living in New York and gotta steal to live, but she manages to make it work based on what she's found out about certain people in the area and how she can use that to her advantage. But I was tempted to skip and skim the parts that were set in the modern day of 2014, which isn't so modern now, but I really did not like it at all. So when I remember those bits as part of the story and the introduction of our character Henry, who to me, I understand why, but he was a bit of a wet blanket and pissed me off. When I think of those parts, I get angry, irrationally angry, and just frustrated because I was like, why? Sometimes I think I could reread that book. Yeah, I feel like there's more to it that you'd pick up on a second reading. And then I think I hated like a third, or what felt like that, of this story because of the modern day setting and the focus on Henry, the character, because we get his whole life story and it just feels so contemporary 2010s sad boy depresso vibes. And like, I relate to Henry in a lot of ways, but it wasn't what I thought I was signing up to read when I picked this book up. I didn't know it was going to switch genre. I didn't know it was going to switch to a completely different main character focus. And of course they overlap and intertwine at some point, but I felt like the point between us meeting Henry and then getting actually back to Addie and her story and how they meet was too long. It should have just been like a chapter about Henry's backstory and then get on with it, because it felt a bit redundant. And when Henry and Addie do meet, there are so many long-winded passages about the different New York things that they go to, like pop-up art galleries and a cool bar underground and whatever, and I just don't care. I don't care. I don't want to read about the now, maybe, is my problem, because I don't really read much contemporary fiction or romance, and it felt like suddenly I was in the middle of a contemporary romance story and I just did not enjoy. It was kind of like, if you remember, if you've seen it, Promising Young Woman, the movie, how there's this dark, sad, melancholic undertone to the movie because you know what's happened to the main character's best friend. And then she meets this guy, and then suddenly it changes to like a bright pops of color. The Stars Are Blind by Paris Hilton playing in the background, and it just feels so lollipop happy, blah blah blah. And it's kind of like, this part of the book was kind of like that, and obviously it doesn't stay that way, and in the movie it doesn't stay that way, and it's made to be a big juxtaposition visually and everything. But in this, back to this, it just slowed the book right down so much, and it's already a slowish paced book, but it just felt like it was like on the brakes with all that background about Henry that I really didn't care about. The book suffered, and so did I. It was so insta love. Why are they in love? Like, couldn't they have just had a friendship? Addie as a character is kind of forgettable in some ways. I do like her, but she's also quite vague. Again, maybe that's the point, having her be forgettable, but I feel like that's getting a little too meta. But multiple times throughout the book, I was like, why is everyone opening up to her about their deepest, darkest secrets? Or why is everyone suddenly like in love with her all the time? Is it just because she's hot? Is this book just pretty privilege? We do have another character, the devil in disguise, who is the ancient god of darkness, a hot grim reaper character called Luke, maybe short for Lucifer, like the devil. And even though we get bits about his character, especially towards the end, he still was not fully fleshed out. Maybe that was a point because he's not made of flesh and human bone. I was more intrigued by his connection with Addie than Addie and I've forgotten his name, Henry, because I don't care. I don't care about poor Henry, I'm sorry. And for a heavily character-based book, because it is more vibe and character than straight up plot, the characters were kind of forgettable and feel more like metaphors for themes or points that the author is trying to make. And I feel like all three of the characters to some extent look at the different aspects of loneliness and isolation. So Addie, again, why was everyone obsessed with her all the time for everything? She didn't even have to do anything. She just had to stand there, be breathing, and people like, wow. And we do get mentions of the fact that she was present at historical events and being a spy, but we don't see any of that, which could have been really interesting, like the French Revolution, hello. Basically, all the flashbacks was Addie being forgotten and crying about it, which I understand completely because you would. But I don't think she has a character arc. Does anything actually change? Does she change? And I'm not talking physically change because she can't age, but does her character change? I don't know. She's immortal and she's immortalized in some ways that the book goes through, which you can kind of work out at some point because of the focus on art and specific artworks, which, side note, was kind of hard to look at on my Kindle when I was reading. Now on to next main character, sadly, who's Henry, because I really don't care. He was bland. I felt bad for him, but he also just, I found him so dull. And I personally thought that Addie and him had much better chemistry as friends, understanding each other, than as romantic partners. They just were together because they could be because of certain factors, but it didn't really make sense. But I guess that's also part of the point. See, a lot of this book, you're like, okay, was that V.E. Schwab being really meta of understanding things and wanting to make metaphors out of characters and stuff? And other times I'm like, no, I think it's just not maybe the strongest part of the book. And then we have Luke as our other main character, sort of, but he's recurring, but he's not there for most of it. I like the idea of his character, even though it might not be the most original thing that now exists in fantasy stories, but intriguing nonetheless, because Addie had such a history with him that was not smooth sailing, it was turbulent. It started out not well with a deal, and then there's their whole dynamic after that. Their relationship when he's there, when he's around, is ever evolving. He's one of the most interesting parts of the book and why this story takes off in the first place. Him and Addie have a connection that has spanned centuries, and yet he's barely there. And what we do see of Addie and Luke is 100% more interesting than her dynamic with Henry, at least to me. Let me know in the comments if you've read this book. Are you a Luke stan or a Henry stan? Or an Addie stan, or a no one stan? Some people might say that Luke was more well suited to Addie, but I feel like he's still manipulative. The whole point and story and plot of her not being remembered is because of him, because if he wanted to, ladies, he would make you memorable so that you don't live alone all your life, because obviously then she just relies on her connection with him. She can't have a lasting connection with anyone else. So it is abusive, coercive control, at least to some extent. He's not a good character, but we know he's made other deals. And again, one of the things I want to know that doesn't get answered is why he's so obsessed with Addie above all the other people who he made deals with. Is it just because she has 7 freckles that keep getting mentioned that are scattered like a constellation on her skin? I don't know. And the book doesn't know either. At one point I thought this was going to be 5 stars when I first started reading. And then when we got the genre shift, it actually made me want to DNF the book in some ways. And I was like, no, I've heard great things about it. I enjoyed other parts of it before this. And then once we got back to more about her and Luke and more about the history, and there was actually a bit of plot towards the end with Henry, it wasn't as bad, but it was still, it lost me a bit in the middle. I think it could have benefited from being a bit shorter and cutting out some of the mundanity, like I said, of just Henry, the whole character. Get rid of him, put him in the bin. And another thing, this book, are you telling me that in this whole time, 300 years or whatever, that Addie has never been to like Asia or Africa or South America? It's a very European and whitewashed kind of story. And in making my review, I took my own notes and looked at what some other people said about the book, and I'm going to include Cindy's review about Addie LaRue from the point of view of how white this book is, because I also thought that during reading. It felt very insular and whitewashed, like when it talked about the cool places to live, like London, Paris, New York, and I was like, okay, that's literally just Europe and America, where else? So Cindy's video discussing this in more detail from the point of view of someone who isn't actually white will be in the description below. So overall, this book, slow paced, meandering, romantic in parts and endlessly frustrating in others, with two timelines running throughout, one in the past and one in the present, one which I liked a lot more than the other, and you can guess what based on what I've already said. But I couldn't put it down because I wanted to know how it all ended, and I have to say the ending, how things were wrapped up, I did appreciate, and I can see why people loved this, and I can see why people did not love this, and I can see why people like me have very mixed feelings, because the book spans so many things that it's quite unlikely you'd be in love with every part of it. But I do know this book has gotten quite a lot of 5-star ratings. So that's it for the chatty portion of this video. I'm about to get into like ending spoiler territory, so if you don't want to be around for that, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and then go away before I ruin it for you. Thanks for watching. You can check out more of my videos in the description and in the suggestions, I guess, and I hope to see you in the next one. Now, for my people who are here for the spoilers, because either you've read it yourself or you're not gonna read it and so you're happy to just be spoiled, you may stick around. Everyone else, goodbye, 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 goodbye. Okay, they've all gone. So I think this book was a very different type of book to what I thought it was going to be, and you can tell the Henry hate is real. I found his sections very like sad boy Tumblr vibes. I related to Henry in some ways, but at the same time I absolutely loathed, maybe not so much him, but all of the portion surrounding him. And when I talked about like the Tumblr kind of heavy-handed bit of writing, a lot of V.E. Schwab's writing in this book was beautiful, but there were some bits like when his best friend B is talking to him about olives and how, I know you love this thing and I know you hate olives and like you should live life, blah blah blah, and he's like, what are you saying? And she's like, well, you've eaten a lot of olives and I know you hate olives and that's a metaphor for your life. And it was just so like on the nose, in your face. And she's the only character of color, I think, in the whole book, and all we get is that she's like a kooky art student who Addie says is beautiful, and that's it. It's just kind of like, okay, this is New York in 2014. Also, I knew that this was going to be Henry's story of Addie, like intertextually, as soon as we got Henry helping Addie make the marks at that art gallery show thing that I also don't care about, but was part of the plot. And how it ended, I know some people also thought it was heavy-handed, how we got the very last chapter of Addie talking about the fact that she's playing the long game and she's gonna basically play Luke until he's sick of her so that she can be free finally at some point in the very wherever future, because she can live forever and so can he. The end of the chapter before that was from Henry's point of view, basically and it finishing with the words, I remember you. And then we get Addie's point of view chapter about how she's playing Luke really and pulling the strings and being the puppet master. I don't know if I would have liked it more or less if it just ended there, because I think the bit about getting Addie's point of view about how this is what's really going to happen maybe was good for a sense of satisfaction that finally she's maybe going to get something sort of positive for her way. But also a lot of the time, even though she gets forgotten, things do go her way. Shouldn't we know what makes her so ironically memorable or makes people want to be around her? What's the draw to her apart from her 7 freckles? Does she actually have something enigmatic that is not mentioned really to us on the page? But also the bit about her trying to outwit Luke. The thing is, he's like a trickster god. He's like Loki. Surely he'll have something tucked up his sleeve and work out what she's doing. And yet she's like, yeah, I've got the upper hand. And he's ancient. He's got more life experience than her, even though he's not necessarily alive. Do you think it was better to have that bit for the people who've read it? Or do you think it was better to end with Henry being like, I remember you? Was it better to have Addie finishing her story herself? Let me know in the comments. If you're gonna add spoily things like this, put it somehow so that people will know it's a spoiler without reading it first, because we don't want to ruin it for people. I still think about it and think how beautiful it was in a lot of ways, and then I remembered how much I loathed the contemporary parts, and I go ew and have a very visceral reaction. So what do you think? Ooh, my eyes look nice though. Except I'm blinded. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more bookish content from me, and I hope to see you in the next one. Let me know what you're reading. If you've read this, your thoughts. Remember, keep spoilers hidden, and I will see you in the next one.